Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into an article that really got me thinking. Psychology Today, or Marketing Weekly, How Native Ads Are Masquerading as Journalism. It's by Jaime Hoerricks, PhD, from the outside. It's a pretty provocative title, don't you think?
Yeah, it is. And it asks a really interesting question, a question a lot of people probably haven't considered. Is a platform like Psychology Today, a place known for mental health information, really focused on helping people? Or has it become more about marketing and profits?
Yeah. I've definitely used Psychology Today before to find therapists or just to read articles, and I always assumed it was a reliable resource. But this article makes a good argument that maybe we shouldn't be so trusting.
Exactly. One of the main things this article talks about is how Psychology Today has evolved, like how it's changed over time. It used to be closely tied to like the actual field of psychology. It even had the backing of the American Psychological Association. But then in the 1980s, it was bought by a private company, a for-profit company.
Yeah. So it went from being focused on scholarship and research to being focused on making money.
Pretty much. That's what this article is suggesting. And it argues that this change led to lower academic standards and a rise in content that's more about getting clicks than it is about providing in-depth and evidence-based information.
Interesting. So instead of scholarly articles, we're getting more opinion pieces.
Yeah.
And what the author calls pop psychology, like stuff that's easy to read, but not very scientific.
Right. And a big part of how Psychology Today makes money is their therapist directory. Therapists pay to be listed. So in a way, it's kind of like a marketing platform.
Wow. That already sounds like a conflict of interest, but
wait,
this article goes even further, right? It talks about how Psychology Today is using native advertising.
Yeah, that's one of the main points of the article. So native advertising is this way for companies to promote their products or their services. And they do it in a way that makes it look like genuine content. So you might be reading something that seems really helpful, but it's actually an ad in disguise.
That's so sneaky. How is Psychology Today doing this?
Well, the article uses a specific example. It talks about this article called The High Cost of Learning Disabilities for College Students. And at first glance, it might seem like it's trying to help people. But then you find out that the author is actually the CEO of a company called Dissolve. And they sell really expensive software for students with learning disabilities, like dyslexia.
Hold on. So they're writing about the struggles of dyslexia, but not telling anyone that they're selling a product that claims to solve those struggles. Doesn't that seem kind of unethical?
That's what the article's arguing. It suggests that this kind of native advertising is actually really manipulative because it plays on people's anxieties and their desire to help their children.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like they're taking advantage of a vulnerable audience.
Exactly. And what's even worse is that this article makes it seem like this expensive software is the only solution.
Yeah.
But it doesn't even mention any of the other options that are proven to work and that are often more affordable.
Like what? There have to be other ways to help students with dyslexia, right?
Of course. There are a lot of proven methods out there, like the Orton-Gillingham approach or multisensory instruction. These methods have been helping people for decades.
And those are usually cheaper than this software.
A lot of times, yes. They can even be provided by schools or through programs that are much more affordable. And there are also a lot of free and open source tools that can be just as effective as this Dissolve software, which, by the way, costs $389 a month.
Wow. So it seems like there's a financial incentive
To push this software as the best option, even though there are other choices out there.
Yeah. It feels like this is part of a bigger trend of making mental health into a commodity.
Absolutely. This Dissolve example is just the tip of the iceberg. This article is saying that companies are increasingly targeting people, like people with dyslexia, ADHD, and autism. And they're seeing them as profitable markets.
So instead of viewing these as challenges that need support and understanding, these companies are just seeing dollar signs. That's kind of messed up.
The article argues that this commodification of mental health is really concerning. It can lead to a system where people feel pressure to spend a ton of money on solutions that might not even be the best fit. And it downplays the importance of creating support systems that are equitable and accessible, systems that cater to different needs.
This is getting really interesting, but I feel like we're just getting started. There's so much more to talk about. What else does this article say about this issue and how it's playing out on Psychology Today?
Well, one thing it points out is that this focus on profits can lead to people downplaying the social model of disability, which emphasizes the role of societal barriers in creating challenges for people with disabilities. Instead, there's this tendency to focus on individual deficits and fixing those deficits through individual interventions, often at a high cost.
So instead of addressing systemic issues that create barriers for people, we're putting the burden on individuals to fix themselves.
That's a key critique the article raises. It argues that this approach ignores the need for broader societal changes, like inclusive education systems, accessible workplaces, and a shift in attitudes towards neurodiversity.
This is making me think about all the messages we get about mental health and how those messages are often shaped by money. But what about psychology today? Is it just a giant advertising platform? Or is there any valuable content there?
It's a tough question. The article says that, yeah, psychology today does have some good content, but it also raises concerns about their editorial process, like how they manage the content overall.
So even if they have some good articles, there are problems with how they handle everything.
Exactly. The article criticizes psychology today for letting people present their opinions as facts without any real fact-checking or peer review.
Seriously. So anyone can just write whatever they want, and it gets published without anyone checking if it's true.
That seems to be the problem. And it goes back to what we were talking about before, that shift to a for-profit model. They're so focused on getting clicks and ad revenue that they sometimes forget about accuracy and balanced perspectives.
That makes sense. It's like they're putting profits ahead of their readers. So what can we do about this as readers, I mean? It feels kind of overwhelming to think about tackling these big systemic issues.
Well, the author doesn't say we should boycott psychology today completely, but they do encourage readers to be aware of their biases and to really think critically about what they're reading.
So we can't just blindly accept everything we read. We need to be more discerning and ask ourselves some questions.
Right, like who wrote this article? What are their qualifications? Do they have any financial interest in this topic? Look for evidence-based information and try to find different perspectives.
That's good advice for anything we read online. It's so easy to just believe everything you see, especially when it comes from a source that seems credible.
That's why media literacy is so important these days. We need to be smart about the information we consume. We need to constantly question things, evaluate them, and search for the truth.
What about sources that are already doing this well? Are there alternatives to psychology today?
There are definitely alternatives out there. This article specifically mentions the outside. As a publication that's doing really great work, they focus on neurodiversity and disability justice, and they provide a platform for diverse voices and perspectives.
So they're kind of like a counter-narrative to the mainstream narratives we usually hear.
You could say that. They challenge assumptions, they question traditional approaches, and they advocate for a more inclusive and equitable approach to mental health and neurodiversity.
That's awesome. So if someone wants to learn more about these issues and get a more nuanced perspective, checking out the outside is a good place to start.
Definitely. They have a lot of insightful articles that go deeper than the surface and challenge us to think critically about the systems and structures that shape how we understand mental health.
And this reminds us of the social model of disability.
Right.
Instead of focusing on what's wrong with individuals, we need to address the societal barriers that make things difficult for people with disabilities.
Exactly. And that requires a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
We need to stop seeing neurodiversity as something that needs to be fixed and start seeing it as something to embrace and celebrate.
That's powerful, but how do we actually make that happen? It seems like there's a lot of resistance to change.
It's a complex issue for sure. But this article says that education and awareness are key. We need to challenge societal biases and misconceptions about neurodiversity and promote a better understanding of what it really is.
So instead of trying to make everyone fit into this narrow definition of normal, we need to expand our understanding of what's possible and what's valuable.
That's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing that there's no one right way to be, and that diversity, in all its forms, enriches our society.
And that includes neurodiversity. It's not a bad thing, it's just a difference. And those differences can be strength.
Exactly. Think about all the brilliant and creative people in history who were probably neurodivergent. They didn't fit in. And that's what made them so incredible.
This makes me think about how we educate kids. If we teach them that there's only one right way to learn and one right way to be, we're limiting their potential and their ability to accept diversity.
That's a really important point. The education system plays a huge role in shaping attitudes towards neurodiversity. If we create learning environments that are more inclusive and flexible, and that cater to different learning styles, then we can help children develop a sense of belonging and acceptance, no matter their neurology.
And it's not just about education, it's about creating a more inclusive society in general.
Absolutely. We need to rethink our workplaces, our communities, and our social structures to make them more accessible and accommodating for people with disabilities.
So instead of expecting individuals to adapt to a system that wasn't made for them, we need to change the system itself.
That's the goal. It's about creating a society where everyone feels valued and respected, and where they feel supported to be themselves.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about the complexities of the commodification of mental health and how important it is to be a critical consumer of information. What are some key takeaways you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway from this whole conversation. We can't just be passive, especially when it comes to mental health information.
Right. It's so easy to feel overwhelmed or even like there's no hope when we're talking about these complex issues.
It is, but it's important to remember that we all have a role to play in making things better.
Okay, so where do we even begin? What can listeners do to be more informed and advocate for a more equitable approach to mental health?
Well, one thing you can do is diversify your sources. Don't just rely on platforms like Psychology Today, even if they do have some good content. Try to find alternative voices, like those in publications like The Outside.
So it's like having a more balanced media diet, not just getting information from one place, but trying to get different viewpoints.
Yeah, exactly. It's about challenging your own assumptions and being open to new ways of thinking.
Makes sense. This article also talked about holding platforms like Psychology Today accountable. How can we actually do that?
There are a few ways. You can contact Psychology Today directly and tell them what you think about their editorial practices, their use of native advertising, their lack of diverse perspectives.
So write to them, leave reviews, engage with them on social media.
Yeah, all of those things can help. You can also support publications and organizations that share your values, like subscribe to The Outside, donate to disability rights groups, share their messages on social media.
So it's about putting your money where your mouth is and using your voice to support the change you want to see.
That's a good way to put it.
It also feels important to acknowledge that this is going to take time. Change doesn't happen overnight, right?
You're right. It takes continuous effort, education, advocacy.
But even small things can make a difference.
Absolutely.
It all starts with awareness, with questioning things, with having those tough conversations.
And with being mindful of where you get your information and who benefits from the stories you're being told.
This has been an incredible conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about how mental health is being commodified and how crucial it is to be critical of the information we see. It's all connected.
It really is.
We can't talk about mental health without talking about ethics and access and the influence of capitalism.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is don't take anything at face value. Always question things. Do your research. Look for different perspectives.
And remember that your voice matters. Use it to advocate for change, support organizations that are doing good work, and challenge the systems that perpetuate injustice.
It's about being an active participant in creating a more just and inclusive world, especially when it comes to mental health.
This deep dive has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep advocating for a better world. See you next time.